us started tonight, we have a very special guest that we are honored to have with us today, and that is Ms. Andrea Beeman, who is our 2020 NEA ESP of the Year, and she is here to kick off tonight's session. So welcome, 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 Andrea.
Greetings, education support professionals. Thank you, Jessica. My name is Andrea Beeman, and I am a proud special education paraeducator from Maple Heights, Ohio, and the 2020 NEA ESP of the Year. I join you tonight in introducing a webinar called Fighting Privatization in a Time of Crisis. This is a topic of passion for me and many ESPs across the country. We know that regardless of the often thankless service we give to our students in ordinary times and the heroic service we give to them now during this pandemic, there are still people out there who would exploit us. There are those who would still privatize our jobs and provide for less than our students deserve. This is why we must continue to be vigilant against privatization. And even in this very challenging time, we can be proactive and fight against the harmful effects of privatization. Our job security is essential to the safety of our students. So tonight, I give you Fighting Privatization in the Time of Crisis. Participate, prepare, learn, and lead. Thank you. And now I'd like to turn it over to Tim.
Again, I'm Tim Barchak with the ESP Quality Department. Unfortunately, I'm doing this solo from here on. Eric Lotke had a situation where he is not going to be able to join us tonight, but we will get him back at another time. I'm going to jump right into the presentation. Hold on just a moment.
Right at the bottom, Tim.
There we go. That was a little scary for just a moment. Okay. You may have heard the expression before, shock doctrine. It comes from a book written by an activist named Naomi Klein. And it refers to a theory about how certain individuals and corporations will exploit a time of crisis or catastrophe for profit. And they do this by actually getting public policy changed that allows them to exploit a situation fully. And we have a rather harsh example of that in education. Following Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, every public school in New Orleans was converted into a charter school. And, currently with COVID, we see virtual, private virtual school operators pressing hard to get into the public market. We also have seen privatizers in food service trying to take advantage of the COVID challenges. That can be pretty scary, to have opponents that are basically large corporations. But think a little bit about an example from martial arts in what's called jiu-jitsu, also in judo and aikido, where actually an opponent who is stronger and larger, that is leveraged against them, where that actually becomes a way to leverage them. The expression, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. We're going to be applying some jiu-jitsu to privatizers tonight. Let's first take a look at their strengths, the places where they're strong and big and scary. The first thing is that they thrive where there's an abundance of cheap labor available for short-term gigs that can be continually circulated among their clients. So, for example, a custodian is told, "Oh no, you're not going to report to Downs Elementary today. Today I need you down at the Commerce Building. That crew down there is short." They don't care about their employees developing any kind of relationship with students or staff. They've got other properties, and schools are just one of them. They thrive in an environment where they can ignore benefits, particularly relevant to our discussion tonight, eliminating healthcare and paid time off, such as sick days, for their employees. They thrive and are strong in environments where they can strictly control the workflow and have regimentation and no flexibility. I first saw this when I was a young person starting out with Service Employees International Union, and that union represented a lot of commercial janitors, and you would see that with the big janitorial firms, where they would totally not let these folks think for themselves. So, you know, on Mondays, you vacuum hallways A and B. On Tuesdays, you buff the floors. On Thursdays, you wipe down the tables in the cafeteria, et cetera, et cetera. Not at all the type of flexibility and freedom to think and improvise that a school custodian has. And finally, these privatizers are used to operating in a space where there's no public transparency or accountability. So here's where the jujitsu comes in. All those areas there that are their strengths are actually the exact opposite of what we need in a crisis time like COVID. So for example, we need support staff who are career-oriented and invested in the welfare of the school and the community. So, you know, if I'm a $10 an hour Sodexo employee with no real connection to those students or that community, why should I show up during COVID? And that's not what we need during a crisis like this. And remember those employees without health care and paid sick leave that we talked about the privatizer having? Well, guess what? Those employees occupy the same space and literally breathe the same air that we breathe. We need folks working around our students and our teachers who have access to health care and who can take a sick day when they need it. The regimentation and lack of flexibility that we talked about, that was part of the business model of the privatizer. Anyone who's on this call tonight who is an ESP, or anyone who is on this call who advocates for ESP, knows what an incredible amount of flexibility our folks have had to show during this crisis. Everything from job duty changes to schedule changes to workflow and pace changes and learning new skills, et cetera. That's what we need in a crisis, not the regimentation of a privatizer. And finally, these privatizers, not used to having any accountability or transparency. Well, guess what? You know, we want to know how many of the food service crew tested positive for COVID. We want to know if a custodian is being pressured to show up for work, even if they're not feeling well. We need full accountability and transparency in a crisis. And here's the thing about it. Those things are not just nice, they're actually crucial to the safety of our students and our teachers. And privatizers literally put our students and teachers in danger. And as an association, we probably need to stop mincing words and say it that starkly. Now, the screen you're seeing now, these are actually just headlines that I copied off the internet from just a couple months ago. And you see there, unsung heroes, unsung heroes, custodians, maintenance workers, food service, bus drivers, bus mechanics, et cetera, et cetera. That's the kind of press that we're getting in the public right now, the kind of attention, recognition that you're essential employees. And, you know, behind a lot of these headlines, if you actually read the article connected to them, there are school administrators and school board members actually quoted in those articles talking about their support staff being essential and heroes. Alice Walker said the most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. That slide I just showed you and all those headlines, as tough and as challenging as times are right now, we also have some power in a window right now because of the elevated public goodwill towards school support staff. As I said, Eric Lotke was not able to join us, unfortunately. And for a lot of his presentation, I couldn't really give justice to parts of it. So I sort of just picked through and focused on one particular part that I thought was really interesting. And we'll have Eric back another time to do a more full presentation of his own work. But one of the things that Eric talked about was the fact that privatizers, outsourcers, they have a story that they tell to our school boards and our superintendents and our parents. And the story is like this. The public sector is inherently inefficient. The top end is bureaucratic and unimaginative. The bottom end is lazy and overpaid. But the private sector, oh, the private sector is lean and creative and efficient. So we should contract out for better services at lower cost. So you've probably heard that or a variation of that before. And it's not true. And an analyst like Eric or myself could dissect their arguments with a bunch of facts and analytics, and we could put everybody to sleep and everybody would still remember their story. What we really need to do is to come up with a better story. People identify through stories and narratives and parables, and a lot of times we're too analytical in the way we push back, and we need to get better at storytelling. And certainly we could tell a story about the fact, let's say for food service, that we shouldn't outsource control of our school lunches to out-of-state corporations interested mostly in profit. We need to keep control right here at home with dedicated public servants whose only loyalty is to the people who hired them and the children they serve. So notice the fact that because that's a narrative rather than just spewing out facts to contradict their argument, that narrative actually sticks with you more. And there are certain key areas that you can leverage. You know, control, us, not them. You know, our community, our school board, not some corporation. The common good, all of us together, not outsourcing. Not, I'm fighting for my job and public employees deserve better, but we shouldn't hand over control. We give superior service to the students and the teachers. We should stress the local perspective, including the fact that, you know, more than 75% of us actually live in the community of the school where we work. Stress that local perspective and stress that it should be service over profits. So what I'm going to give you tonight is one example of a campaign, a proactive campaign against privatization that you could run even in the teeth of this COVID crisis. Now, the tactics and strategies that that are used for this campaign could be used for a number of ESP campaigns. So if you don't like the idea of an anti-privatization school board resolution, you know, perhaps for you or your situation, it's a living wage campaign or a campaign for proper PPE or whatever the case may be. So, but in this particular case, I am suggesting that we actually be proactive, that we take the fight to them on our terms and our timetable and mount a campaign now. And mount a campaign for an anti-privatization school board resolution. You'll have access to this model language, but I'm just going to pick out a few lines of it to read to give you the idea of what we're talking about here. Whereas the school district values the contributions of our education support professionals in the current COVID crisis and beyond, and whereas our educational support professionals are putting themselves at risk to continue essential services and programs for our students, and whereas our education support professionals have shown remarkable adaptability and flexibility, and it goes on from there. Another key line is, whereas privatization often leads to a combination of business practices that will make our school community less safe, including an unstable workforce of temporary job seekers without a commitment to students, the lack of adaptability of duties and scheduling flexibility, and a workforce more likely to have no access to health care or paid sick leave. And whereas in these challenging times, we need more transparency and public accountability. And it goes on from there, and then it ends with, now therefore be it resolved that the school district will not privatize, outsource, contract out, or in any way undermine the direct employee-employer relationship with our education support professionals, be it further resolved that the above commitments are incorporated in district policy. The key talking point around this is going to be that privatized workers put us all at risk because they lack the commitment, the professionalism, and the adaptability that our district needs. And also, you know, we're going to remind these folks, remember those headlines that we saw a few slides back. We're going to remind these folks that, you know, just a few short months ago, they were talking about our ESP being heroes. And, you know, well, how are we treating heroes? These are not people, you know, holding you up and asking for an arm and a leg. They're asking for a simple commitment that you will at least offer them some job security, given the great commitment at personal risk that they have shown. So, you know, and again, we're taking the fight to them proactively. If you push forward a campaign for this resolution and you lose that campaign, all you've really done is show the places where you need to do some work. The school board members, perhaps, that you need to replace, perhaps different parts of the community that you need to reach, etc. That, you know, that's very different than waiting for the next shoe to drop and waiting for an actual privatization fight, where if you lose that fight, you lose jobs. Here, if you, you know, in quotes, lose that fight, again, you've just shown where you need to do some work. You've definitely elevated the visibility and the power of the ESP, and you've put this on the radar screen that they know that if it ever comes down to an actual privatization, they're going to have a fight on their hands. So this is a quote from General Ulysses S. Grant. "The art of war is simple enough. Find out where your enemy is, get it at him as soon as you can, Strike him as hard as you can and keep moving on. Now that sounds like a pretty superficial, folksy thing to say, but in the context of its day and age, it was really astute, and it had a number of political little barbs in it, because what had been happening is that President Lincoln was not able to get generals in charge of the Army of the Potomac who would actually engage the enemy, would actually pursue them, and would actually press them. And when he found Grant, he said that at last he had a general who knew how to fight, who would actually engage the enemy. You know, we know where our enemy is, right? This is the location of our enemy. Those things that we talked about, you know, their use of a transitory workforce, their ignoring benefits like healthcare and sick days, their regimentation of the workflow, and their lack of transparency and accountability. That's the location of our enemy, and that's where we'll take them on. We're going to talk about using all of our resources. Local member activism that's coordinated by your local leadership and your UNISERV, communications, hopefully the ability to access the affiliates help with that. Political power, again, ideally accessing the affiliates, government relations, and community power, utilizing the public outreach of the association. And we'll go into each of those. But first, let's talk a little bit about building your capacity for the local activism. The very first thing you got to realize is that your members who may be facing a threat of privatization may not understand what's at stake, really, that there's no guarantee that that private contractor is going to use the existing staff. He or she may have their own staff. And all existing agreements are null and void, whether that's a collective bargaining agreement or whether that's just an understanding that you've had with the district. And the contract here, and a key point, the contractor cannot make money without in some way going after staff compensation. You have to understand that public school employees are at-cost employees, and yet you've got a private contractor coming in there and saying usually that they can do the job 15–20% cheaper and make a profit. There is only one way they can do that. They don't have any magic efficiency or management skills that can make up that kind of money. The only place they can go after that kind of money is employees' pension, healthcare, and paid time off. We should remember what the great blues musician Robert Johnson said. He said, "The world is run by those who show up." And as a foundation of our local activism, we're going to show up. So, you know, there are a lot of challenges to being a public school employee, but the big advantage or blessing is that we actually elect our bosses, and our bosses have to do business in public on a monthly basis, and they have to allow public comment in front of the stakeholders. And that's a really big advantage that too often we don't utilize. We have to remember that ESP need to be recognized names and faces. So the example I use is let's say I've been a second grade teacher in a school district for 27 years. I probably carry my own constituency with me. It would make it really difficult for an administration to mess with me too much. If I'm a paraeducator or a bus driver or a custodian for 27 years in a district, I may or may not have that constituency. Sometimes with ESP, we have to be a little more intentional and create those relationships. And one of the easiest ways that we can start, open the doorway to that is utilizing the Board of Education meeting. Show up at the school board, utilize the public comment at the school board meeting, meaning, every month the president of the para local gets up in public comment and says X, Y, or Z about what the paras are doing. And maybe some months he or she brings another para with them from a particular division or building, and introduces them and has them talk a little bit about what they do. Again, it's really important for ESP to be their own faces and stories at these school board meetings. Even if you're in a merged local situation where it's teachers and ESP, and teachers happen to be the top officers and attend the school board meeting, it's still important to get the ESP in front of the board and the stakeholders. A really useful tool is to establish a monthly meeting between the ESP president and the school board president. The more you can regularize it, institutionalize it, the more it's a relationship, versus you only talk to the school board president when there's some sort of a crisis or you need something. Whereas, every second Monday of the month, you have coffee for half an hour after school with the school board president. That starts to actually build a relationship. You can have an ESP day at the board. Eventually, and of course this is post-COVID, you can work up to a situation where you can run a little project where you have an ESP, where you have a board member shadow an ESP for a day in their job. I've seen that in a few states, and that ends up being an extremely powerful project that really wins over school board members who have no real concept about what you do. All right, that was all building capacity for local activism. Now we're going to get into really talking about some of the pieces of a campaign to pass something like an anti-privatization resolution. So first thing is take the direct approach. Each of those school board members actually needs to be contacted and lobbied directly by preferably ESP leadership and teacher leadership together in the same meeting, so you have a show of solidarity. And you need to run it like an actual campaign where we do what we call assess those school board members. So you just use a simple 3-digit method. 1 means that they support the resolution, they're with you all the way. 2 means that they're telling you they're undecided. And 3 means that they're opposed to helping you on this privatization issue. And in any campaign, whether you slate the time period to be 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, whatever, eventually what you want to see in those numbers of assessments are you want to see what we call polarization. Meaning, if you have, for example, a 7-member school board, you don't want to have, you initially may end up with something like one of those school board members is a 1, one of them is a 3, and then you've got 5 who say they're 2s, undecideds. Eventually, at a certain target point in your campaign, you want to have what you call polarization, where you force them to make a mistake, to make a choice to be either a 1 or a 3 and know where you stand. I would recommend that if you decide to go with an anti-privatization resolution or some other sort of a resolution, that you actually get your model language and publish it far and wide, and are asking the school board members to adopt and sign on to that particular resolution, versus telling them that you would like a pro ESP resolution, in which case you're likely to get them to draft up something that doesn't get you where you want to be, particularly in blocking out the privatizers. You want to drive home the idea that until ESP have job security, students and teachers are not safe. Privatization puts the school community at risk. You know, utilizing your local activism, you want to get the stakeholders involved. Again, you know, utilize the public comment at school board meetings, try to get on PTA agendas, of course, social media pages. Don't forget, in some states that education bloggers actually have quite a bit of impact. And then, you know, things like church newsletters, social justice committees, that sort of thing. Now, this slide is not to be taken literally. It is an example of how you escalate your activism, because your members are not actually born activists. People have to learn activism with taking on achievable tasks and getting small victories, and then taking on larger challenges and escalating that activism. So this slide is showing an escalation of activism. I'm not necessarily recommending that you do all or any of these. So, you know, you can start out with something simple that simple, but yet gives you a good read on how your solidarity is going. And that's like a color day, you know, like everyone wears red for Ed on Monday. That gives you a really quick assessment of how you're communicating to your membership and how seriously they're taking the activism. So like if you have, you know, 80% of the folks that are into it enough that they remember and wear red on Monday versus 20%, you know, gives you an idea of where you're at. Also equally able to assess is, you know, is asking them to show up in person, or I guess in this world right now, virtually at a school board meeting, Board of Education meeting, or asking them to show up and giving them, you know, scripted roles for public comment. A further escalation is a bell-to-bell action where everybody gathers, you know, in front of the school and waits to go in the building until the first bell, and then comes out all together at the second bell. And then a mini walkout would be not a strike, but something like everybody at noon walks out for 5 minutes, something like that. Again, I'm just showing a progression, an escalation of activism, not necessarily recommending these as actions. Communications, allow your state affiliate to help you craft a student-centered message. And in this particular case, we would want to equate refusing to endorse our anti-privatization resolution as being pro-privatization, which makes everyone less safe. Political power. So I think I referenced earlier in the presentation that I had originally come out of SEIU, Service Employees International Union. You know, SEIU, when they give a candidate, a political office holder, an endorsement, it requires more than just, say, being one of 100 votes in the state house. It requires that every so often you may be asked to step forward and, you know, on behalf of a worker's struggle, that you may be asked to sign on to a letter or show up at a rally, et cetera, et cetera. I think we in the NEA culture could learn a little bit from that and ask more of elected office holders for the right of the endorsement. So for example, You know, school districts have within them other political entities. There are state representatives within a given school district boundary. There are state senators within those district boundaries. So when there is something like a privatization fight going on, what if we ask those folks, you know, to step up for our membership and give a superintendent a phone call and say, you know, look, Dr. Bedlow, those, you know, those employees that you're talking about privatizing are my constituents. They're taxpayers. They're members of this community. And, you know, I would like you to find another solution to that. I'm asking you that as a state senator. That sort of thing is something that we should really consider using our political leverage. Community power. We need to really get out into the marketplace of ideas and into the culture that we as an association view privatization of support services as a real problem for education. And I think back on in the worst times of standardized testing, when teachers were really being pressured, sometimes at the risk of holding on to their jobs, pressured to teach to the test. I think about how, as an association, at every level, at every time we had an opportunity to speak to the powers that be, we somehow worked into the conversation that you know, teaching to the test was becoming a real problem for education. And we got that really out into the marketplace of ideas so that by the time that ESSA reauthorization rolled around, that was still when Congress was in control of the Republicans, and yet we got ESSA passed and got some real changes on testing. What if we took that same mindset about the privatization of school support services, so that when you know, our leadership, our governance folks, our high-ranking staff folks were in the public, in places like the State Board of Education or the Chamber of Commerce or the various political coalitions we sit in, or the state PTA or wherever, what if we intentionally and consciously started working it into our narrative that we wanted to get in a word about the fact that the privatizations of school support services were harming our kids. I'm referring, of course, to all this as putting, you know, all of our pieces into play on this issue: the local member activism, the communications, the political power, and the community power. This handsome gentleman here is, this is actually a picture of a statue of Marcus Tullius Cicero, who is arguably the greatest statesman who ever lived. He was an ancient Roman, said a lot of wise things about people and power and political situations. And one of the things that he said was that if you're ever stuck, if you're ever stalemated, where you're in a quagmire, you don't know the way forward, start a fight. In the course of that struggle and the chaos, opportunities will open up and you'll see a path through. What I worry about in the current situation is that we, the collective we, the royal we, we're kind of waiting for the next shoe to drop. You know, this is definitely a challenging time in every way. But we don't want to be paralyzed by the challenge. We don't want to be stuck in a quagmire. Start a fight, figuratively, of course, but start a fight, whether it's, you know, whether it's for this privatization resolution that I offered as an example, or if it's some other fight, a living wage campaign, or better PPE, or whatever the cause might be, don't wait for times to get better, or don't entrench waiting for the worst. Be proactive, engage the enemy on your time, on your timetable, on your turf. And I think that's the underlying message of this presentation. I want to thank you all for indulging me with your time. I know that you have long days in your day job, and to spend an hour with us in the evening really shows some commitment, and I appreciate you giving me your eyes and ears tonight. And I am going in just a moment to hand things back over to Jessica, and if we have any questions, she will facilitate us through that, and we'll go from there. Thank you very much.
So thank you so much, Tim. As I've noted in the chat box, please, if you have any questions there at the bottom of the screen, you will see a Q&A feature that will allow you to post questions for Tim there, so that we can capture all of the questions in one place. I did see one question pop up in the chat. I'll go ahead and ask that question because I don't see any questions yet in the Q&A box. So I'll ask that question to get us started, but please, as other questions come in, please utilize that Q&A feature to put any questions that you may have there. So the question, Tim, for you, the only one that's been posted thus far is, have you seen many subcontracting threats during COVID? In Pennsylvania, we have not.
So the one thing that I have noticed is some encroachment in the area of food service. And it started out innocently enough with sort of the accusation that, oh gosh, the school food service folks will not have the capacity to keep up with this food distribution. This is a totally different area for them than they're used to, and they won't be able to sustain the school meal distribution. And then, of course, innocently enough, some private food processor would offer to step in. So we have seen some of that. Fortunately, and it says so much to our hardworking and brave food service folks. After a couple months, they sort of left a little doubt that they were up to the challenge, and I think that has helped a lot. But yeah, that's one area. And then, of course, we have seen pretty significant pushing by private operators of virtual schools. That has been very problematic, and in some parts of the country, they've actually landed some pretty significant contracts, and that is going down a slippery slope.
Okay, we have another question. This question says, what happens when local union leadership is at least partially collaborating with privatization in order to save, and save is in quotation marks, public education?
So there are a lot of complexities that get sticky. For example, one of the things that we at the NEA have had to caution folks about around the country is the idea of privatization through attrition or gradual privatization. So we've seen deals cut in different places in the country where the district and the privatizer have said, okay, you made your point. Tell you what, we'll only privatize those with less than 5 years of seniority, or we'll only privatize new hires. And so they'll start running these hybrid situations where you have both privatized employees and public employees. And they do things where, you know, more work gets shifted over to our public members, and they're you know, harder on them. And anyway, it's a bad road to go down, and it's selling out your next generation to privatization. Not something we recommend. But I would say that you know, just general general advice, if there seems to be some question about how the local is handling things, to, you know, approach your uniserv and get your state affiliate involved in the conversation to see what's going on there. And I think that would be the best route to go.
Okay. The next question is, do you think that the HEROES Act was stopped in May by the Republican majority in order to starve COVID-19 stimulus funds and force public school privatization?
So, I mean, it was definitely stopped, I think, for a number of political reasons. And yeah, I would say that would probably be part of it. I mean, Betsy DeVos is not even very coy about the fact that she doesn't like public education. She would rather public education be private. And that, of course, includes school support services. So yeah, I think there was a little bit of the shock doctrine involved in the killing of the HEROES Act.
Okay, so we don't have any more questions now, so I'll just give another minute for anyone that may have questions to pop them into the Q&A chat, and we will just give that a minute. And in the interim, if you have any questions that may come up later on, you can reach out to Tim via his email. Tim, if you want to type your email address into the chat, and I will announce it. It's tbarchak, TBARCHAK @NEA.org. But he's also typing that in the chat so that you can email Tim directly if you happen to have any questions that pop up after this session.
Yeah, please do. Anybody who works with me knows that this issue is a real passion for me, and I really welcome consulting with locals or state affiliates on this issue. So yeah, reach out.
And seeing no other questions come in, I'm going to go ahead and move. Oh, wait, one more. Okay, we're seeing privatization of components of our institution. It says institution bookstore. How do we fight that sort of budget-saving privatization?
So I was going to take a quick look here to see if I get the gist.
It says we're seeing,
oh, like probably like a campus bookstore.
for example, a bookstore, right?
Yeah. So that's probably something I would want to consult with you offline on, because I don't think I have a quick off-the-cuff answer for that. Although I think I get the gist of what's going on. I know that some colleges and universities have started to take their campus bookstores and basically sell them off to, gosh, I'm sorry. I wanted to say Borders, not Borders. Anyway, sorry, my brain. But I've seen this before. They sell them off to one of the big remaining bookstore chain, which is skipping my brain at the moment. But anyway, oh, Ambassador. Okay, but yeah, I would certainly be willing to have a conversation with you about that. I don't think I have an easy off the cuff answer on that.
Okay, and the next question, it says, thanks a lot, just a young kid trying to learn the education area, but I am still a bit confused on what industries all do this. Who?
Oh, okay. So basically, the ESP, Education Support World, is 9 career families. The ones most vulnerable to outsourcing or privatization are transportation, school bus drivers, custodians, and food service. Those are the 3 that are most vulnerable. But truthfully, we've seen occasions where virtually every career family, including the last few years, we've seen significant privatization attempts on paraeducators, which we always thought that they were invulnerable from privatization, but not anymore. And in each of those career families where the privatization takes place, it's a different set of privatizers. So for example, in the custodial world, it might be American Building Maintenance and Service Master are a couple of privatizers. In food service, it might be Sodexo and Canteen. But there are a number of corporations that do this for a profit, and it depends upon the career family that is being privatized. In the transportation industry, First Student is a big privatizer, as is Ryder and Mayflower.
Okay, I don't see any more questions that have popped in. So, and we are close to 8 o'clock. So at this time, I am going to go ahead and close our Q&A portion of this webinar. Thank you for your questions. And Tim, thank you so much for the feedback and answers that you provided for us tonight.
Well, thanks, everybody. Good night.
Yes, again, if you have any other questions for Tim, feel free to send him an email with that information, or that question, and he'll be sure to get back to you. To request a general session-specific certificate of completion as a participant of recorded sessions, please send your request by emailing espqweb@nea.org. All requests must include the session title and the on-screen certificate of completion code. Session certificates will not be provided if your viewer code is not included in the email request. Note, due to limitations in our ability to track attendance after live sessions, requests for personalized certificates will only be provided for participants of live webinars whose attendance can be verified. The certificate received for viewing recorded sessions will be session specific, but will not include personalized names. So on behalf of the Center for Great Public Schools, NEA ESP Quality Department, I would like to once again thank our presenter, Tim Barczyk, tonight, as well as our special guest, Andrea Beeman, for her opening comments, and thank all of our participation that we had from our participants. Please stay safe, stay healthy, and good night from the NEA ESP Quality Department.